Welcome to our Timely Topics webinar on the status of women's political participation in North Carolina. I'm Diana Wynn, President of the League of Women Voters of Wake County. Before we begin, I have just a few announcements regarding some of our other League activities. It's election time, so as you might imagine, the League is very busy. Our Voter Services Committee has been promoting voter turnout and educating voters about the election process. Much of our work has been on a separate platform called vote411.org. Vote411 is where you'll find our online candidate guides for the races at the national, state, and the local level here in Wake County. It's also a great resource for all sorts of election information in North Carolina. Vote 411 won a National Webby Award earlier this year, which is essentially the equivalent of the Oscars for digital platforms. Our volunteers are sending thousands of postcards encouraging people to vote and to use vote411.org. Next month, you'll start seeing Vote 411 yard signs at some of the early voting locations in Wake County, and we'll be advertising on WRAL Mix 101 radio. We encourage you to check out vote411.org and help us spread the word about this useful, nonpartisan election resource. On Vote 411, as well as on the LWV Wake website, you can find our candidate forms for the Wake County Board of Commissioners and the Wake County School Board elections. We have some members-only events coming up that may interest many of our members. On Monday, we're hosting a theater watch party to view several one-act plays as part of Burning Coal Theater's The 19th Amendment Project. Friday of next week is LWVNC's virtual celebration of the League's 100th anniversary this year. And on September 28th, we will have our next Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Roundtable discussion, this time focusing on the subject of white privilege. Next month, we will host our first virtual field trip for members to the J.C. Ralston Arboretum. And of course, next month, we will sponsor another Timely Topics webinar. All of our Timely Topics webinars are open to the public, and next month's will be about climate change. You can find more information about our activities at lwvwake.org. Before we begin, I want to briefly explain how we are using the Zoom platform for this webinar. Except for the presenters, everyone is muted and you're not on video. We're not using the chat feature in Zoom. Instead, please type your questions in the Q&A feature. If you hover your computer mouse near the center bottom of your Zoom screen for most of you, a menu will appear. You should then be able to click on the Q&A option. At the end of the presentation, the speaker will be asked your questions. We'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can. Please don't wait until the end of the presentation to submit your questions. Diane Payan, our Timely Topics Committee co-chair, will monitor the questions submitted and will serve as our moderator for the Q&A segment later in this session. This webinar is being recorded and will appear on LWV Wake's YouTube channel. I'd now like to turn our program over to our other Timely Topics co-chair, Cheryl Keaton, who is going to introduce our speaker.
Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Cheryl Keaton and I'm here today with Diane Payan. We are the Timely Topics co-chairs and your co-host today. And before we welcome our speaker, we would just like to say thank you all for coming to this evening. Isn't it nice that we don't have to travel in the rain? I have the honor and the pleasure of introducing our guest speaker, Mary Williams Stover, this evening. Mary is the Executive Director of the North Carolina Council for Women and Youth Involvement. The Council manages state and federal grants to nonprofits and government agencies that serve survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. The Council also works with state youth councils and students against destructive decisions. In addition, the council works with the state summer internship to increase youth leadership, engagement, and public service skills. Mary Williams Stover's work and her organization provide resources and advocacy for North Carolina Commission and Councils for Women. Mary serves on several boards and commissions to advise organizations such as the North Carolina Department of Administration, led by Secretary Michelle Sanders, to Governor Cooper, the North Carolina General Assembly, and other state agencies. Mary is a Leadership Triangle Fellow and an International Association of Business Communicators Fellow, one of the highest awards presented by this organization. We are so fortunate to have Mary Williams Stover here and for her to share the vision stated in her bio, which is to make North Carolina the best place for women to thrive. Mary Williams Stover is going to talk about a report published just this year, The Status of Women in North Carolina, Political Participation. Mary Williams Stover, welcome. We are so delighted to have you. Mary, if you will turn on your video and unmute yourself, please.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Cheryl. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, yay, it's so nice when it works.
It is. And I'm going to close off my video now. You'll be able to start your screen sharing and I'll mute myself. Thank you, Mary.
All righty. I am so excited to join you ladies today and to talk about the Status of Women report. And thank you, Diana, for the invitation. And we'll have lots of time for question and conversation. And it is nice not to have to travel in the rain, although I do miss seeing all of you wonderful people and your smiles and just wonderful attitudes, but we can smile over the phone, right? Okay, so let's get started here. I am going to attempt to share my screen and my slides, and Diana will help me if I need it, and it looks like we're good. You can see my slides. I can see my slides. Okay. So, as I said, this is an opportunity, and I thank you so much for inviting me to share with you some of the highlights of the Status of Women in North Carolina Political Participation report. And this is one of several reports released by the Council for Women and Youth Involvement in partnership with IWPR. So, I thought that it was important to start with this wonderful slide that shows the members of the North Carolina Council for Women Advisory Board. These are the women who are seated at the historic chambers at the state capitol. We took this picture last year as part of Women's Equality Day, or in honor of Women's Equality Day. And we just love seeing all of the women here in this historic chambers, because we know there was a time when there were no women in this room when legislative affairs were being conducted. And so here we are sitting in this room, and the individuals who are serving, who are seated, are members of the Council for Women Advisory Board. 20 members are appointed by Governor Cooper, and those are the individuals who have provided leadership and guidance in this, in the process of commissioning and leading the Status of Women reports. The women who are standing represent women who have been either elected or appointed to serve North Carolina in various ways. And so some of those women you may recognize. There include members of the cabinet. Chief Justice Sherry Beasley is there, as well as State Auditor Beth Woods in her Power Red. I just love that suit. She shows up and she is ready to be seen and has done a wonderful job of serving our state, as well as Secretary of State Elaine Marshall is in the picture there. Also, First Lady Kristen Cooper is in the photo there, along with Associate Justice Anita Earls, who is there. And we also have Secretary of the Department of Administration, which is the organization that oversees the Council for Women and Youth Involvement, standing in the front next to the Chief of Staff is Secretary Michelle Sanders, and the Chief of Staff there in the lovely blue in the center is Christy. And so I just love this photo. It represents service and leadership, and also women in our state who are changing dynamics. Okay. So about the Institute for Women's Policy Research, this is the organization that conducts research for the past 30 years on a number of topics that are relevant to providing leaders, decision makers, and organizations with information through a gendered lens. This is an organization that has created and developed the Status of Women reports for us for the past several years. And it's a wonderful resource for you as you continue to educate yourself about the impact of women, and also how various public policy issues are impacting the lives of women, not only in the states, but also nationally. The Institute for Women's Policy Research does release a State of the States report. And one of the reasons that we like to work with this organization is that they allow us to compare North Carolina to all states in the nation as part of our research. So the Institute for Women's Policy Research is the organization that the Council for Women commissioned to do the research and to release the report. So this next slide gives you a sense of the state of the status of women and the top of topics that the reports are available. So since 1996, the Institute for Women's Policy Research has started compiling information on the status of women. Highlighted in blue here are the topics that the North Carolina Council for Women has commissioned and released during the past several years. We have released these reports since 2015. That was the last time we did the major report on the status of women in North Carolina. We did one major report, and we realized there was just so much information. People just had a hard time digesting all of it. And so this time we decided to release the report in a series. So we started with the first report, which is the status of women employment and earnings. And then last year we released the status of women health and well-being report. And then of course this year we released the status of women political participation report. Next year we will wrap up the series with the final report on status of women poverty and opportunity report. But you can go to the IWPR website and see other topics related here: violence and safety, work and family, and also reproductive rights. Each report that the Institute publishes includes thousands of data points, breakdowns by state, race and ethnicity, and demographic characteristics, as well as, and this is what we like about the process, recommendations for policies, right? Because we not only want to know where women are in terms of the status, we want to know what are the recommendations for moving us forward. One thing about the current report is that it allows us to, not only today, I'll give you a snapshot of some of the highlights of the report, but it also allows us, this time around, we interviewed women who are serving in various capacities as elected officials at the county level, in the judiciary, also organizations that are providing institutional support to women who are interested in learning about becoming candidates for office, such as Lillian's List and other women's commissions in the state. And so we interviewed those women because we wanted to hear from them in terms of what are the challenges, what are your viewpoints, what have you learned that you would share with other women who are interested in serving for office. And so I encourage you to go to our website, as I know you will do if you haven't already, to look at the full report, but also to look at the profiles of women who are featured in the report. So this is Valerie Foushee, Senator, North Carolina District 23. And I love what she says here in terms of women make up 51% of the population in North Carolina. And because we represent such a large segment of our community, women should have a significant presence in our state legislature. And believe me, women most certainly have what it takes to be legislators. Senator Foushee has served for many years, and so she is representing what it takes for women to be legislators. Some of the women here, pictured here, represent the profiles that you will see. And I love this because we have in the report the profiles of people like Chief Justice Cheri Beasley, who of course, you know, is a trailblazer. But we also have young women who, for example, the young woman pictured in the middle of the screen, Nayana Sherrod, who represents our young leadership. She is currently president of the Youth Council in Rocky Mount Area Youth Council, as well as we have certainly Jo Nicholas, who is head of the League of Women Voters. And we have representatives also who are serving at the county level, county commissioner, and then also Sarah Stevens, who's serving in the North Carolina State Legislature. So we have a wide range of women who are represented here. The first Muslim woman to be elected to the Durham City Council is also profiled in the report, Nita Alam, who we had a wonderful time of hearing from her and her challenges and reasons for running for office, as well as really, as I indicated, some of the young women who are blazing trails as they move forward to provide service to us all in our state. So this is the slide that really kind of gets my goat as I look at the data, and the IWPR assessment is if we continue with the current trajectory, and that is that since 1975, the total share of women in the North Carolina legislature has increased from 8% to 26% in 2008. But we've seen that representation drop now to 25% in 2020. And so according to IWPR's calculations, if we continue the current rate of progress in North Carolina, we will not see parity in the state legislature until 2084. And remember, Senator Foushee just said we're 51%, women represent 51% of the population in our state. So why are we moving in this direction? And why is it going to take so long if we continue on the current path to achieve parity? That's certainly not acceptable to me, and I'm sure it's not acceptable to you either. Again, one of the benefits of the report is that it provides us with a way of looking at how we compare to other states. And so And looking at the comparison, we can see here that we have received, when you look at 4 different factors, voter registration from 2016 to 2018, women's voter turnout from 2016 to 2018, the share of women in elected offices. This includes the share of women who represent each state in Congress, the US Congress, the state legislature, and also state elected offices. And then lastly, looking at women's institutional resources. But you can see here that we're ranking in the top for one of our indicators, which is institutional resources. And then 2 out of 4 of the indicators were right in the middle, ranked at 24. And in the bottom third for women who are in elected offices. So really overall, North Carolina earned a D in the area of political participation, which is a step back from the C minus that the state received in 2015, the last time the political participation composite was released. And so this is definitely not representing a state that is thriving, nor a state that is engaging all of the possibilities for women to not only register to vote, but to actually have their vote matter, and also to actually serve in various elected offices. So we have a lot of work to do. This slide really gives you a snapshot of how we compare when you look at North Carolina compared to other states. And you can see here, and it's a little difficult to see, but basically the North Carolina rates in the bottom third, along with South Carolina. When we look at other states who are ranked in the bottom third, you can see it's West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, but really those states that are in the top third are mostly in the western part of the state. And then way up there, you see Maine, New York, and others. So overall, though, we'd like to see this state map change because we'd like to see more women elected across the board. We have had tremendous strides, but as you can see, we still have a lot of work to do there. So when we look at women's political participation in the US overall, we've made progress in some areas, and then in other areas, we have work to do here. The current numbers of women holding seats in Congress has been on the rise. Of course, we saw the elections of 2018 where a record number of women were elected. We see more women serving in statewide offices and state legislatures. That's at an all-time high, and that's good news. And also, the women in North Carolina are more likely to turn out to the polls and vote. That's our track record. The share of women who voted in North Carolina has increased slightly, 55% in 2012, compared with 56% in 2016 and 2018. So we pretty much are holding steady there. North Carolina has also seen an increase in the share of women state representatives from 22% of seats in 2015 to 28%. Again, slight increase, right? And then between 2017 and 2020, women made up 48% of North Carolina governor's appointments to state level boards and commissions. So that represents almost 1,100 women who have been appointed by Governor Cooper. And this is an increase from 2016, where women made up 37% of appointments. This is significant because it really represents a starting point for a lot of women to public service and public office. And so that is part of the good news. But in terms of where we have work to do, I'm glad to see the league working on spreading information about how to vote, because we certainly see that there's a disconnect between turnout and registration, right? So we need to have more progress in that area. The number of women representing North Carolina in the U.S. Senate remains 0. And women in North Carolina basically hold 20% of the seats in the state Senate, which is a drop from 24% in 2015. So we've lost ground there. And also in terms of a decrease in representation in statewide elected offices as well. So we really have to, if you're looking for where to target and where we've lost ground, you can see this is where women have lost ground in terms of statewide elected offices, in terms of representation in the state Senate, and then also in terms of really getting women to register and more women to register and to participate. So when we look at this slide, we see that looking statewide, again, we have women who are serving as mayors in major cities in North Carolina. That's a bright spot. Women hold 1/3 of the statewide elected offices. And we also have, in 2018, women make up 40% of the North Carolina District Court judges, 18% of the Superior Court judges, and 43% of the Supreme Court justices. We have 3 women serving in the state Supreme Court. So we really are increasing our representation of women in certain areas there. And of course, the statewide elected offices, I did highlight all 3 of the women who were in our picture there. Secretary of State Elaine Marshall, State Auditor Beth Woods, and Secretary of Labor Sherry Berry. But compared with other states, North Carolina falls in the middle of the pack for the share of women in executive office. So there are, believe it or not, still states in our nation where there is not a single woman who holds a statewide elected executive office. So when we talk about nationally, we still have a lot of work to do. But we are making progress. Slow and steady wins the race, right? I love this slide because it represents Chief Richardson, who is chief of the Haliwa-Saponi Indian tribe, actually Dr. Chief Richardson. And she certainly is breaking a mold here. She has served in that position since 2014, and she is the first female to serve in this capacity. And the Haliwa-Saponi are a state recognized tribe based mostly in Halifax and Warren counties surrounding North Carolina, Halifax and Warren. And she says the chief's position doesn't necessarily have to be filled by a male. Women can hold the position and be role models as tribal leaders. Now, I would bet you if you didn't look at this picture and you weren't seeing that slide, and I started to introduce you to Chief Richardson, that most of you would not have the image of a beautiful woman such as the woman who's on this slide, right? And so I love the opportunity that she has embraced to break the mold and the paradigm in terms of who can be chief and who is chief of an Indian tribe. And why does it matter? Because here we go. We see Sarah Preston, who's executive director of Lillian's List of North Carolina, one of those organizations providing institutional support and resources to women who are interested in running for office, who would like to know more about what does it take to run for office. And she says, you know, you can't be what you can't see. That's why it matters. When women see each other in power, it helps us to believe that they can be next. And so the time is now. I heard Diana talk earlier about the activities of the league. I'm singing to the choir here. I know that you're engaged. And this has been a wonderful opportunity to challenge us all as we engage in conversations with our friends and neighbors around how can I help you to register? How can I help you to turn out and vote? How can I encourage a woman I see who has potential to think about running for office, right? Women often want to be asked, need to be invited to run for office. How can we continue to bring others with us to educate not only ourselves and others about absentee ballots? So what is our next? What is it that we are all going to do and can do so that we can change North Carolina's rating from a D to an A, right? I know I'm a parent. My child brings home a D on their report card. It's unacceptable. No way. Got to do better. And so thank you for what you are doing and getting information out and helping people understand how to participate in this upcoming election. It's so important, and we do know how important it is. As I said earlier, each Status of Women report includes a series of policy recommendations. And so this report allows us to receive those recommendations, and I won't read them to you. There are some that I really jump out to me in terms of changing this rating for North Carolina. And that is really number 2, preparing strategies to ensure safety for voters during the pandemic and beyond. We know record numbers of people are registering for requesting absentee ballots. And it's all the talk. But believe it or not, we still have an opportunity to ask the question, have you thought about how you're going to vote? What is your plan? Have you thought about requesting an absentee ballot? How can I help you to do that? And then just continuing to reach out to others. I thought about, and I've had that conversation with my young adult children. How are you going to vote? Have you thought about getting an absentee ballot? I thought about also friends of mine who I know are working in service industries and who work long hours. Like, have you thought about how you're going to vote? Now's the time to think about that. So I'm talking about getting involved on an individual level. And you're already involved in many ways in spreading information, but we certainly need to do more. And obviously recruiting more women to run for office. We need to have more women in the pipeline. There are a lot of barriers for women. You don't get paid a lot to serve for office, to hold office. Many women are still single heads of households. And so you see women and men who are office holders, who are mostly either business owners or retired or have the financial means to hold office while raising their families. And so that's a barrier. And also looking at improving access to mentorship and sponsorship for women who are running. How can we support women? How can we expand programs that provide education and training for women, particularly young women? Many of the women who are profiled in the report told us they ran because they cared about a single issue. And so we know that when women are represented in political office, they will lift up the issues that impact women. We do know that. So it's a gain if we can encourage more women to run, because the issues that matter most to women will get lifted up, and we want that. And then also the structural barriers that prevent women from running for office. I talked about that. Many of the women who were interviewed in the report and who were highlighted during the virtual events that we had last month talked about the phenomenon of campaigning while female. having to answer questions about who's at home watching your kids, right? While you're out here at this political event. The kind of question that their male counterparts just do not have to respond to. Or one woman being told to change her name because as a Muslim, it just was not a good look for her to have a name that was difficult to pronounce. She lost the first 2 times that she ran for office, but she continued, persevered, and she was elected on her 3rd try. But boy, why do you have to go through that? But it's a learning process for sure. But we do need to look at how we can eliminate barriers. So again, now's the time to make our voices heard. Now's the time to do everything we possibly can to engage others in this election, to reach out, to help people take the steps that are needed to make sure that their vote will count. And again, what is the one thing that you will commit to doing to encourage political participation among women in North Carolina? We know that largely when we look at North Carolina, that white women and Black women are voting. We see that we can increase voter participation among Latina women and Asian women and American Indian women. And so if we were going to think about targeting our efforts, we can think about populations that historically have not participated. And then again, lifting up some of the strategies that remove the barriers, such as absentee ballots, right? Such as helping elders get to the polls, or in this case, helping them, again, request absentee ballots. So that is the thing that comes to my mind. But what's the one person that I can reach out to make sure that that person can exercise their right to vote? So I'm sharing this slide with you because I'm so psyched that we're recognizing 100 years of the 19th Amendment. And so I continue to celebrate the centennial. And obviously, many of you know that Black women were not afforded the right to vote, did not achieve the right to vote with the passage of the 19th Amendment. And so the state of North Carolina launched a campaign last year, She Changed the World, and I'm happy to have served on that planning committee along with my good friend Diana, and worked to launch an event at the state capitol to kick off the celebration of the 19th Amendment and the centennial. And so this year, I challenged myself to do some reading about advocates, and I want to share with you this book that I have enjoyed. This is a book about Mary Church Terrell, phenomenal woman who was one of the first Black women to earn her master's degree. Also responsible for being one of the founders of the NAACP, a staunch suffragist, and she really believed in bringing people together as she advocated for the right to vote, but also for racial justice and equity. And the organization that she created and founded used as its motto, it was the National Association of Colored Women, lifting as we climb. She also is the founder of a major Black sorority, Delta Sigma Theta sorority, which I have the privilege of being a member of. And so just a wonderful resource. For those of you who like to read, I challenge you to check out this book, share it with you. And this is another book that I have loved reading about. This is a phenomenal woman, Ida B. Wells. Talk about a crusader for justice. Again, marched in the historic parade with the Chicago delegation in representing not only women of Chicago, but also Black women. And she was an anti-lynching advocate. use the power of her pen and her voice to lift up awareness of this crime, and to continue spreading the word about how we cannot tolerate this kind of injustice in America. And she started a school and continued to educate young women and men and boys and girls throughout her life. So if you have not read this book, Crusade for Justice, I challenge you to check this one out as well. This is her autobiography, and it is phenomenal. So does anyone know who these folks are who are in the picture here? Diana, can you see the chat? Can you tell me who's in the picture?
Mary, we don't have chat on, but
Okay.
I can
All right.
answer the question for you if you'd like.
Go ahead, Diana.
The people I see are, I believe, Ida B. Wells and Frederick Douglass.
Okay, yes. When I've shown this picture before, just about everyone can identify Frederick Douglass, one of the most photographed individuals of his time. He understood the power of the photograph. But very few people know that this is a young Ida B. Wells, who is a contemporary of Frederick Douglass, right? And she and he came together to lift up and oppose the fact that there was not a representation of Black Americans, African Americans, colored Americans at that time in the World's Expo that was held in Chicago. And so again, a shero in her time who deserves just as much recognition and accolades as Frederick Douglass. And so that's why I shared this picture with you. For any of you who like comic books, who have children who like comic books, this is another one of my favorite books that I want to share with you, Amazon's Abolitionists and Activists. This book features information about all kinds of women who have worked for labor rights, equal rights, social justice, reproductive rights. It is a phenomenal book and a really good, easy read. It's a graphic novel, graphic history of women's fight for their rights. So just want to share that one with you as well. I think you would enjoy that book. And honestly, I get no benefit, no proceeds from sharing these books with you, but I love to read. And so I challenge myself during this year celebrating women to learn more. And so these are some of the books that I've loved, and I want to just share those with you. Back to the point, 2084, right? For parity. We can't wait that long. This is my beautiful granddaughter. And she'll be 70 years old by the time supposedly we achieve parity in North Carolina. That's too long. I want her to grow up seeing more equity when she looks at our legislature, when she looks at who's serving. And I want her to have a sense of also she can become an elected official and do a great job of serving in our state. So thank you for what you have done, League members. I really appreciate this time to be with you today, and I will stop talking and accept your questions. Thank you.
Mary, thank you so much for sharing your work and the results of the findings, encouraging us to get involved and describing other ways that we can do that. Before we open up this section to questions, I'm going to open my video here so that you can see me and I can see you. Before we open up the segment to questions and answers, I want to invite the attendees to read more about you and the Council for Women and Youth Involvement by visiting the lwvwake.org, where your bio is there and it talks more in depth about all of the organizations and the work that you've been doing. To read Mary Williams Stover's recent report and the previous publications and to find out more about the work she and her organization are doing, visit the North Carolina Council for Women and Youth Involvement website. There's a treasure trove of information there, and that particular report that Mary's been talking about today has so much data in it that you can spend hours just considering and reading. So I encourage you to do that. And at this point, I'm going to turn this portion over to my co-chair, Diana Payan. And I see that we have some questions, Diana.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Thank you. We do have questions. Related to your talk, someone is asking, what are the demographics of women with the lowest registration and voting participation?
And so that's an excellent question. I don't have the full report in front of me. That's another reason to go to the website. I do recall that, again, voting registration and participation is highest for white women and Black women in North Carolina. And again, lower for Hispanic women and Asian women and Native American women.
Great, thank you. And then I have a question from someone asking, have you looked at the data on what percent of candidates in North Carolina are women? And what percent of women win their races when they do run for office?
I have not looked at the current information with regard to the percentage of women who are candidates. Meredith puts out a poll, and they will do a study after this election. So I do know that they are releasing their report, and they look at not only the state level representation, but also county level. So their report is very granular in terms of looking at that data. So I would encourage you to keep your eye open for that Meredith poll and Meredith report on the status of women's elected officials in North Carolina. They do a great job with that report.
Okay, great. So from someone who has read the report, you mentioned that despite being the majority of North Carolina's population, 51%, women in North Carolina hold a third of the statewide elective executive office or seats. And it seemed to be a big decrease from 2015. And so this person is wondering what accounts for this change. And you've listed a lot of good solutions, but at the top, what's at the top of your list for how to change this downward trajectory?
Well, I think that having candidates that, number one, people are excited about is certainly a reason we can change it. We saw 2018 in terms of record numbers of women getting elected, and that's because we actually have record numbers of women who ran for office. That's one reason why we saw that change happen. More women stepped up and said, doggone it, we can do better. And so I think having candidates who people are excited about will get people to come out, and particularly younger voters. Younger voters are key, and having candidates that younger voters can be excited about and will engage in is important. Pretty much older voters, women over 50 vote. It's when we look at the demographics of opportunity to increase voter turnout, it definitely rests with younger voters. And so that's an opportunity there. And then just the realistic aspect of removing barriers. When we look at having more time to vote, maybe having some states have made voting a holiday, right? So you're not competing with, remember that working mom, I've got to get my kid. Well, now I'm home teaching my kid, if I'm fortunate enough have a job that allows me to work from home. I am teaching, I'm working, I'm still taking care of my household, and I'm supposed to go out and vote. So just removing those barriers to voting is an important aspect, I think.
I have one question that is also a comment. I raised my 3 sons by myself. I could not have done it without the before and after school care provided by the public schools. I'm amazed that North Carolina does not have this service. It's one of the obstacles in North Carolina for women. Has before and after school care by North Carolina public schools been discussed? And is this something that could be controlled at the state level or implemented by the state?
Our last report, actually our first report on the status of women employment and earnings, talked about the fact that one of the biggest barriers to women continuing in the workplace and continuing to earn a salary that's more equitable is the lack of affordable childcare. It costs almost as much to have your child in childcare as it does to send your child to college. And I'm not talking Ivy League, right? And so one of the recommendations in that report is to increase funding for childcare. And so that's a budget issue. I mean, great question, because it comes full circle. If we elect people who understand the importance of affordable childcare and before and after school care as a necessity to support workplace and to support our economy, then we can see money directed in that area in the state budget. So if we elect people who have that position, then we can see a response in terms of how the budgets are created, both at the county level and at the state level. So that's an excellent question.
Here's one. Asking whether you know the percentage of women that are running for office. In other words, what will the percentage of women in North Carolina General Assembly be if all of them won their elections this year?
I can't say I know the answer to that question. The challenge of releasing this report this year, and we thought it was important to release the report this year because we're all talking about political involvement. The downside of it is the data is based on historical patterns and trends. So the next report will do a great job of including information on 2020. But that's the downside of it right now.
Okay, I think I'm down to the last 1 or 2 questions. You stated there's a decrease in registered women voters in North Carolina, just a slight decrease. Do you think that decrease could possibly be caused by purging voter registration rolls?
Possibly. Possibly. Women change their names when they get married. That's some of the issue. I know that when we look at removing barriers to engagement, we also see gerrymandering as a barrier because it limits the opportunity again for women candidates to run for certain positions. And so that's not a real barrier to registration, but again, having candidates who are exciting to people and who people want to register and vote for. So it's really connected. That's a good point. It could possibly be a factor.
That's about all I have. I had sort of a comment that when you showed the map of the United States, it was noticed that we're even worse off than other southern states. I wonder if that was if you know the factor for
that. All I can say is I've been tracking some of the activity, and you know, Virginia is working hard to change its direction and to eliminate barriers for voters. And I think that's because they have more representation in their legislature now of people based on the 2018 election who are bringing up these issues and who are now in a position of power to make change happen. So we have work to do, certainly. Not a particularly progressive state, I guess you couldn't say. North Carolina is a progressive state. Certainly can't compare us to California, but we have made progress. And I don't want to lose sight of that. We have made progress. We have had women in the Senate representing North Carolina, right? We've had more than one woman. We have had a female governor in North Carolina. So I remember that, but my granddaughter doesn't know that, right? So the history gives us an opportunity to lift up what is possible and also to move us forward and to challenge us to move forward. And that's one of the goals of the report, is to put forward the data that says we can move, we can do better. We've made progress, but we can do better as a state. We can become that state where more women thrive and reach their potential. And that's what we hope to see.
Well, Mary Williams Stover, on that note, I would say everyone should open up that report and read it. And we thank you so much for being here. You've inspired us and motivated us, and we wish you good luck. And I look forward to having you speak again to us. And for our guests, thank you. Thank you for participating. Thank you for listening in. The webinar is recorded, and within a few days, it'll post it on the League of Women Voters Wake County Facebook page. And don't miss our next timely topic presentation. It's on the website now. So go ahead before you forget and sign up. It's going to be on climate change, not only where we're at in this state, but what we can do. So register now. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.